that's probably the sequence from the film that stayed with me the most vividly, was that entire almost mini movie within the feature where Ray and Rachel are with Tim Robbins' character in the cellar. And that's where the movie, I think, is where it's mostly is the most horror movie it can be. Actually, that's how it wants to be.
Agreed.
Not the aliens, but because of Tim Robbins' behavior. You know, I mean, it was all of those things. It was interesting to see the film again yesterday and go, oh yes, that sequence, that entire 20 minutes maybe, was as evocative to me watching it yesterday as it was when I first saw it at the cinema.
Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Kingdom of Dreams podcast, The Making of Stories. I'm your host, Jawad Mir. Today, my guest is author James Clarke, who's written several books, including one on Steven Spielberg in the early 2000s, and he's here to talk about 20 years to Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds, starring Tom Cruise, Dakota Fanning, and Tim Robbins. We talked about the film itself. We talked a bit about Jaws, because it's been 50 years to Jaws. We talked a little bit about Jurassic Park, with Jurassic World coming up, but mainly about War of the Worlds. And it was a really cool conversation as we dig deep into what make the film work in a lot of ways, certainly some scenes, visual effects, the characters, and all that. Without further ado, here's my conversation with author James Clarke, reflecting 20 years to Steven Spielberg's War of the Worlds. War of the Worlds, which I think came out on June 29th, 2005, I would guess.
Yeah.
But in 3 days from now, it's the 50th anniversary of Jaws, which is crazy to even think about that it's been that long.
Half a century. I mean, I was only 3 when Jaws was released, so all I can say, if I may, is that the first time I ever saw Jaws was on the TV screen, not the movie screen, and
Same here.
I was probably about 16, actually, not even a young teenager. I was right in the middle of being a teen, and I remember watching it with my brother on kind of on a late night broadcast of the movie, and of course I had read everything there was about it at that point in, I don't know, the late 1980s, and just was truly amazed. And then I think I finally got to see it on the big screen at the most 3 years later, being very specific about it for you.
Yeah.
I was quite involved in our university film society, which was entirely run by the students, or by a group of students. And I remember, this was really cool, actually, John. I don't know whether I just grabbed the opportunity or created it for myself, but we did a Steven Spielberg movie season. And I'm talking about 1991, so I'm talking about, in a sense, relatively early days, relatively.
Yeah.
And I remember we screened Jaws as part of that, and so that was my chance to see it on the big screen. But I'm going back 34 years ago. I can't believe it.
Yeah.
But what a film! I don't know. I mean,
Well, it is an incredible piece of cinema because for me, I don't remember what it was. I just came from the hospital in the early 80s. I don't know if it was 82, 83, or 84. And I had some sort of surgery. I don't recall what it was, but basically, I had to go through a surgery for, it wasn't anything serious, but for about, maybe a couple of hours. And I came home and I was still recovering and I was band-aid, on my leg and everything. And my brothers were watching Jaws. And the idea of being just coming from the hospital, going through the surgery, where you see blood and everything, and then you're watching a shark movie. I mean, that was I still remember that one moment where I was holding my leg, and I remember I think we had paused the film, and I went to the bathroom, and I remember thinking, oh my God, shark, right? And I never saw it on the big screen until last year or 2 years ago when it came out in the movie theaters.
yeah.
And it was phenomenal experience. I mean, I've seen it so many times, just like everybody else has, and it's so crazy that how it's become such a worldwide sensation. I mean, they're doing a whole event at Martha Vineyards, right?
They are.
This year,
They are.
50th anniversary, and there's a documentary coming out, and
Well,
yeah, so much.
it's interesting that Jared, because of course, if like me, I'm assuming you did. I'm pretty sure you would have done. I remember buying one of, if not the first DVD release of Jaws that came with a really lovely documentary at that
Mm-hmm.
point when we were probably about 20 years into its anniversary
Yeah.
years, sort of mid 1990s. And I think I've still got it actually, but I mean,
Sorry,
it,
I'm just
it,
gonna pull it
it'll
out
be,
right
no,
here.
not at all. It'll be interesting to see whether that's the one.
Yeah.
Wow, look at that. Amazing, amazing. It'll be interesting to see whether the new documentary offers up even now, some insights or recollections that have never made it to the record before. But I mean, I think it was implicit in what you just said, I suppose, in a way, Jarwood, which is that with Jaws specifically, although there are obviously other films in his filmography, my goodness, but it's so familiar. It's so familiar that you probably feel like you've seen it, even if actually the fact is you never have. I mean, it's such a frame of reference, isn't it? And obviously the poster, the original poster, the music, certain shots, I mean, it's so just in the mix in a very potent way, really. But I think what fascinates me, we may have spoken about this when we had our previous conversation, is we could talk about this all day, but is how much more attention is paid now, finally, after some years of it not being the case, I think, in a way. But just the storytelling, just literally, the shot for shot storytelling, the blocking, the camera movement, things that I think, at the risk of sounding pompous or pretentious, the very things I think some people were really clued into from day one with Spielberg's movies, but which a lot of people didn't. They sort of saw the genre and they saw the fantasy of it or the escapism of it, however you want to describe it. But what they didn't seem to see was like, yeah, but look how he's framed that shot, or look how he's, covered that action. I mean, things which you will be familiar with because it's something you've always cared about. I feel like I've always cared about it. And it's just interesting with something like Jaws, because you certainly see that in relation to the movie now. Isn't just, oh, it's a scary movie and the music's great, for example, which it is, but just a real sense of, yeah, but look how he gets from here to here in a scene. Or, I mean, I saw something not so long ago online, inevitably, and it was just a little thing about a long take for the scene where they're on the ferry boat going across, and he's got the mayor on the boat on the ferry, and who's in the foreground, who's in the background, and just that beautiful. And it is beautiful, I think, just that choreography, really. And I think that with something like West Side Story, which I really, really love that film, actually, a great deal. I think that really, I mean, just really reminded audiences of just like, look at what he can do with that choreography. That's the only word to use, really. So whether you've got Jaws down here on the timeline or West Side Story way up here, just that.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think in terms of choreography, like if you look at even Duel,
Mm.
right? I mean, the film is about just what, few people? Like there's only mainly like one or two,
Yeah,
there's a protagonist, there's an antagonist, and there's some extras. And especially being in the car, I know we're supposed to talk about War of the Worlds, and we'll get to that in a second, but he was pushed by the studio executives just to shoot it with a screen in the background, right? Which was the way they did it back then. And he pushed for it. No, it has to be in actual locations, and how there's so many similarities if you study Jaws, Duel, Jurassic Park, and War of the Worlds, right? I mean, there's all the other films too that he's done, but those four, there is protagonist and antagonist, man versus man, man versus animal, right? Then man versus dinosaurs, man versus machine, which is aliens, and they are so either if you watch them one after the other, you will see how similar they are in terms of the way the shots are done, the blocking, the arc, and the suspense and the intensity. And you're right, because Jaws for me was, the music, the shark element and all that for a longest time. I think maybe about 15 years ago I started realizing the blocking part. And it's especially the scenes when he's with his family, Roy Scheider's character in the beginning, and how that's executed, and the first shark attack at the beach, how that's pulled off, and especially the one that you're talking about, the mayor, I mean, any other director would have been moving the camera or cutting back and forth, but what he did was he used the movement of the ship as the moving, the motion in the shot, and that pretty much is as simple as it can get. Like, why make it complicated? But that's Spielberg for you.
Just, I don't know. I mean, watching. I don't know if this is the moment to segue to War of the Worlds or to start it more
Sure.
formally. But what I watched it again yesterday for the purposes of our conversation today, and the first thing to say is I had not seen War of the Worlds in quite some time, and I saw it at the cinema when it was released in the summer of 2005, and what really hit me was how many shots I remembered. Specific, I didn't remember any lines of dialogue, but how many images, that's the key word, isn't it? How many images I remembered. Not because I'd seen them in Cinefex or Starlog magazine or whatever, but on my shelf here or whatever, but just in here. And I just thought that was very telling as to how visually powerful War of the Worlds is. And also, and this is more of a sort of narrative propulsion thing, point to make, how it just gets going straight away. It does not hang. It's a very lean film. I think it comes in at just under 2 hours. I think, and and I don't know. I have to confess, I don't know how much was not didn't make it to
But
the final. I have
yeah,
no idea. You may know, but it's so lean, actually. I mean, it really doesn't mess around at all. And I just, I mean, and you've already touched on it, Joe, talking about, Jurassic Park and Duel also. Um, it's a monster movie. It's a film about crowds of people panicking. I mean that in a very literal way to some degree. But the thing that really struck me was how much of a horror film it is, actually. I mean, yes, you go, okay, science fiction is H.G. Wells. It is about a certain technology having an impact on humankind. But, watching it within the last 24 hours, it's not even been 24 hours since I saw it afresh. I just thought, wow, it's such a horror film.
yeah. It is, and I mean, I had one or two problems with it, which we'll come to later. But overall, for me, the biggest thing was uh, the Tom Cruise is such a big star, even at that time. And since you watched it yesterday, if you watch it very carefully, maybe the opening shot of Tom Cruise being like a blue collar worker and then having a family, going to his home and meeting his ex-wife, it completely takes away the fact that this guy is Tom Cruise, right? He's such a vulnerable character in that film, and he pulls it like you can't tell that's Tom Cruise. Like no matter
I,
how many times you watch that.
it's interesting you say that. I made some notes in my being very, very, what's the word? Schoolboyish and good student. I made some notes for the purposes of today. And one of the notes I made to myself, which I've got in front of me on my screen, and I've just written, Cruise is really good at portraying frayed characters, just like in Jerry Maguire. So
Hmm.
Jerry Maguire is a long way away from War of the Worlds, although they have the same cinematographer in Janusz Kaminski, of
Yep.
course.
Yep.
But Jerry Maguire is a romantic comedy essentially. But in that film, and I would certainly encourage people to watch it if they've never seen it, he's really fabulous, especially in that first half hour, at playing this guy who is completely at his wit's end. It's within the context of a comedy, so it's got a certain tone and pitch to it. But in that scene, or that sequence, when Ray and Robbie and Rachel arrive at his former wife's house in the suburbs, and it's all very beautiful and well appointed, and he's in the kitchen trying to make them some sandwiches, and that's the moment I wrote this note down just for my reference. It is absolutely brilliant. That is, what a brilliant performance, and it's everything that you have just described. This is not Tom Cruise in Maverick mode or Cole Trickle mode from Days of Thunder or whatever. This is a guy who's completely falling apart right in front of your eyes, and it's
Yeah. It is, and then it's just one of those things with this film is that we're talking about horror. I think for me there was two scenes. I mean, there's so many which are actually full of suspense. Yeah, there was tension and all that. but there's two scenes that really, to me, for a Spielberg film, um, to have. Not that he has never had it before, he has, but the way he did it, that when they get to the restaurant after the escape and there's people swarming the car and how that plays out. I mean, it's like, and that is completely accurate because when shit hits the fan and people have to survive, they will do, if not that, maybe much worse things. All of us, including me and you. And then the scene which was never shown, but you hear the sound with Tim Robbins and Tom
Oh,
Cruise. You know that is like, I think that's one of the most brilliant scenes in cinema, and you see a little girl just reacting to it.
that's, I mean, just to jump, just to stay with that for a moment, Joe. I mean, the first point you make about that sense of kind of mob chaos and complete collective terror. I mean, the great thing about that scene, of course, in the pouring rain and the car, and you could pull it out of the film and say to somebody, "What genre is this from?" It's got nothing to do with science fiction, and I mean that in the best way. It's just very good at capturing people in a state of complete crisis, really. But just to come back to the other point you make about the Tim Robbins character, again, watching this, it was interesting watching it again yesterday. As I say, for the first time in at least half a decade, I have to say. That's probably the sequence from the film that had stayed with me the most vividly, was that entire almost mini movie within the feature where Ray and Rachel are with Tim Robbins' character in the cellar. And that's where the movie, I think, is where it's mostly is the most horror movie it can be. Actually, that's how
Hmm.
it felt to me. Not
Agreed.
because of, not the aliens, but because of Tim Robbins' behavior. I mean, it's all of those things. And the very first shot that introduces us to him, which I think is the silhouette of his arm raised with the rifle in it.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the first shot of him and the introduction to him. But the lighting in it, I mean, it just obeys in the best way, all of the conventions, if you like, of a horror movie aesthetic. Apart from, yes, it's underground, so that kind of is not unfamiliar, but just that, low key lighting and just the shadow. I mean, just all the obvious things in a way. But it was interesting to see the film again yesterday and go, oh yes, that sequence, that entire, was it 20 minutes maybe? Maybe.
Probably, yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's quite a chunk of the film in a sense. It was as evocative to me watching it yesterday as it was when I first saw it at the cinema. Which
Yeah.
was, you know,
And what's amazing about that, I mean, I saw it maybe 2, 3 months ago.
mm,
I rewatched it. I was flying. I watched it on the plane on my laptop, and that sequence, if my memory serves me right, doesn't cut away to anything else.
no, it
So
doesn't.
that,
You're
right,
right.
you're literally there through, and that's what's so brilliant about it. If you really think about it, if it cuts away to even a small scene or some, alien attacking outside, it takes you away from those three characters, fears and tribulations. Um, and again, yeah, I mean that sequence itself is like a short film,
It's
right? It's
really, honestly, it did it when I saw it at the cinema 2005. That's how it felt to me. I thought, and I sort of just thought, wow, what a cool thing. I mean, obviously, every feature film is made up in a sense of lots of shorter films pieced together in a hopefully a very coherent way. But this particular sequence in this particular film is, I think, if someone said to me, "Show me a," I'm sort of surprising myself by saying this in a way, but it's like someone said to me, show me a sequence from a Steven Spielberg movie that just really gives you a flavor of what he's about. It could actually show them that because, as you know, and I'm sure lots of other folks out there would also recognize and enjoy, the horror film aesthetic and style and feeling and mood and the ideas that are in there in a horror film. Obviously, they're strung right through his movies. Actually, certainly as a director. Um, so that was that really it really struck afresh yesterday watching it. I was like, this is a horror film. I would almost think of it more as a horror film than a science fiction movie, actually, in a sense. Um, and yeah, I just really, I mean, I enjoyed it. I didn't watch it and go, oh, it's not as strong as I remembered it, or it's not as. enjoyable, and it is enjoyable. But my goodness me, Jared, I mean, something to say. Uh, Again, I've got it in my notes here. Is how bleak it is. Really, I mean, obviously, what's happening is bleak, but it doesn't shy away from depicting the bleakness of it. And I don't even mean the ferry scene where the tripod upends the ferry, and I don't even mean that. I mean that's, oh gosh, dare I say it? You could almost not include that scene,
Hmm.
but obviously it's a moment of huge visual spectacle. But and what I'm really talking about are images like the clothes falling through the night sky.
Yeah, yeah.
Very, I suppose, perhaps a very evocative one. Obviously, the images in that completely brilliant sequence right up at the start when they first discover the tripod because it comes up out of the ground. I mean, that is so astonishing. That again, the storytelling of that, the anticipation. I mean, yes, it is kind of dazzling when it finally erupts from underground, but that 4 or 5 minutes prior to that is, I think, as good as actually the anticipation to see the T-Rex in the rain when it breaks through the fence. I mean, it's got that sense of incoming threat and the imminent threat, and just how he teases it out. Really, I mean, it's just so wonderful. And
It is.
I remembered that first revelation of the tripods being a favorite moment from probably that and the cellar sequence for me were the two big moments actually. Just dazzling, really.
Yeah, no, I couldn't agree with you more. And what's so incredible about that year is very similar to the year 1993 when Jurassic Park and Schindler's List came out in the same year. And this year, in 2005, War of the Worlds in Munich came out the same year. And it was post, the Iraq War and everything. And there's a scene, there's a dialogue in War of the Worlds, which I don't know if it was in the version that I saw because you saw it recently, but I remember it was definitely in the version that was shown originally. It may say very well still be in there. Tim Robbins' character says, "All occupations end." Right? There's a small segment of line in that, and obviously the film was more about like an aliens invading Earth, and it could be metaphorically used in any context, especially at that time, and I would say even now, right, with what's going on in the world. And for him to make Munich, which is something more or less pre-occupation of of what's going on right now, and to have those two similar films about similar themes, but one being science fiction slash horror and entertaining, and the other being, you know, pulled out from history and presented in a similar fashion. And there's a line of occupation in that film too. And I just thought that was fascinating that how he uses themes, same themes, and just presents them in two different genres in one year.
It's I don't know. He's just I don't know. I mean, I could wax lyrical forever about this, as you know. But watching the film yesterday, it's so explicit that it's addressing those certainly the very immediate moment back in 2005 with everything that had happened in the previous several years. And the point's been made by others, not by me, but I am making it, which is that actually, if you put the Terminal, War of the Worlds, and Munich together, you get this informal trilogy, all within the space of 18 months at the movies, amazingly. You get this informal trilogy, um, even if we see that in hindsight. But I think it was actually fairly tangible while each of those movies was being released. But it was about America and, in fact, a more international community as well. But it was about all of the things you just talked about, and you actually get them in, and so you actually end up with them in the form of a comedy drama with The Terminal, a science fiction horror movie, and I mean, I always think about Munich as a thriller, of course, because I think that's a fair
Yeah,
description.
yeah, yeah.
Although what it also has in it, and perhaps not to talk about Munich so much today, perhaps there's another conversation another day for that. But I mean, Munich has this, um, that character of Avner is in such a state of crisis. Again, I mean, that's what drama's about, is about crisis. Um, But as you say, with War of the Worlds, to be able to, and that's the beauty of science fiction, certainly, although any genre, is that you can give everything a metaphor. You don't have to deal with it head on in a sort of more literal way. Um, and of course, watching it yesterday, of course, I'm watching it in a post-COVID world. I mean, so what did we know in 2005? But to watch it now with our memory of everything that unfolded 5 years ago, which now seems so long ago to me, at least, my gosh, you just kind of go, oh goodness me, this is even if you had no, even if you watched, sorry, let me start again. Even if you watched War of the Worlds for the first time tomorrow, with your memory of the COVID experience, if I can put it that way, but with no knowledge or experience of 25 years ago or 20 years ago, in terms of of things that were going on. Isn't that fascinating? I mean, stories do that all the time. They get reinvented and they take on new relevance and meaning for people at their moment in time. I mean, that's Shakespeare plays do it all the time. He,
Yeah.
he may have been writing about life in Elizabethan England, but actually, it's still got something to say in 2025. So, I there was that really hit home yesterday, was just that sheer resonance of it now 20 years later in different ways, but just how, I don't know, just shot for shot. I mean, there's a shot right up at the front when he's playing baseball with Robbie in the back garden, and
Mm.
and the ball goes through the window, and then there's and it was interesting because I remembered the shot, and the shot then just frames Ray in the curve,
The broken glass, yeah.
which immediately reminded me of the. I mean, there are lots of examples, I think, aren't there? There must be, of course, but there are. But it reminded me of the shot of the jaw, literally the jaws of a shark, and the camera pushing through them. I guess in Quint's
Mm.
hut. But all of those things, just all of those really lovely, elegant filmmaking devices. That's a bit of a cold way to put it, isn't it? But just frames within frames, and we've talked about the blocking a little bit already.
Yeah.
But also, I think as well, just to stay with it for a moment more, we were talking about. I suppose really what we're talking about is the kind of political, not I don't mean party political, but the political resonance of the film, and touching on things that people were certainly very aware of in 2005. But again, the the image of the bodies being zapped by the tripods, and just the ash falling and so on. I mean, I don't want to sound trite about it, because I really don't want to be trite about it, but it immediately reminded me of the scene in Schindler's List when Oscar comes out of the factory at a certain point and sees the ash gathering on the wheel arch of the car, and then we go from there and we understand what's happening. So I'm not saying that that's conscious decision on the filmmaker's part to go, oh, I need to repeat that moment,
Mm.
but you as the audience, you've got any number of other films in your reference bank, if you like, and it does all kind of come together in that way. And the other thing that really caught me as well yesterday, Jared, as well, just to say, if I may, was just the film was shot in the autumn, as people may well remember. It was shot very, very quickly for such a large project, between sort of October, November 2004 and into the new year of 2005. But my goodness me, that wintry autumnal atmosphere, which isn't in a sense present all the way through the film, but there are certainly any number of shots that are clearly filmed in a kind of autumnal light, which of course you can make that look very beautiful. I mean, if you look at Clint Eastwood's film Unforgiven, they make a real virtue of the autumn sunlight. But that autumnal and certainly wintry light and atmosphere,
Adds up.
it's there. There's a shot of the survivors, or people wanting to survive, marching or walking across a kind of, I guess, a piece of farmland. It's certainly rural, in a sense of almost like these refugees, just crossing the land. It's like suddenly,
Yeah.
you know,
100%. And you talked about Terminal in the trilogy, so I'll go beyond that. I never thought about Terminal as sort of part of that. But if you look at, when did Terminal come out? 2006 or 7? I think
summer
2006.
2004, actually, summer
Was it
2004.
4?
Yeah,
Okay.
incredible.
So you look at AI,
Hmm.
you look at Minority Report, you look at Terminal, you look at War of the Worlds, and you look at Munich. 5 years or 6 years. And you look at the themes of those movies, and you look at where we are now. AI,
Yeah,
immigration,
yeah,
occupation, wars, surveillance,
yes, with Minority Report. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
I mean, go figure. Like, when we were watching all these movies in the early 2000s, we probably in our never thought this would even be even possible in our lifetime or even our kids' lifetime. But we are living all of it right now. And you talked about that refugee scene in War of the Worlds. So, did I ever tell you about my trip to the set of the War of the Worlds?
no, no, not at all.
So, when the Super Bowl trailer dropped, or
Yeah,
supposed to drop for the War of the Worlds, when they first showed the bridge sequence,
yeah, yeah. I remember. Yeah.
I don't remember how, somehow for DreamWorks fan site, I ended up getting the Super Bowl spot before it was even broadcasted. So obviously uploaded it, server crashed and everything, and then I got an email from Paramount legal department and this the normal stuff. And then I get approached by the Paramount publicity because I think at that time I never thought about it, but now looking back at it, obviously, you're mature and you realize they kind of, instead of like, torching me or trying to put me down, they start talking to me just to make sure that I don't do anything again. And
Yeah.
then they invited me to Paramount's office, and they wanted to take me to War of the Worlds set where that scene was, the refugee scene.
Ah, okay. Yeah.
So I remember I went with one of the Paramount's publicity agents to, I think it was in somewhere past Santa Monica,
Mm.
and I was supposed to interview Spielberg. That's where we were going. I was supposed to interview him, and that same night I had a red-eye flight. And then we waited and we waited and we waited, and then I was told that he's not available. He's busy, obviously, he's shooting a film, right? And but that I remember that whole sequence of the military trucks going up the hill when Robbie is
Yeah, yeah.
that was there. But that was such an incredible experience that I'll never forget because just being on a film set of that scale,
Mm,
especially that kind of a scene,
mm.
it was probably March, April, I think, and
Oh,
they were
yeah.
just
Okay. Yeah. There you go. Yeah.
yeah,
Right up at the
yeah,
end of the winter.
yeah,
But I think that
yeah.
was. I mean, that's an amazing. I didn't know that, and it's that's a great story to tell. But I think it really, as I say, you know, it adds to a certain sense of. There's just a real sense of sorrow all the way through the film. That was one of the words I again put down in my notes for our conversation today. Yes, the film has moments of horror and the horrific, but there is just this sense of sorrow. There's the sorrow of his family having fallen apart, which that's a very you know um,
Well,
relate.
the fact that you mentioned it, I just realized something. Maybe it was always there. The world is falling apart around him, and he's trying to keep his family together, which is already fallen apart.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's
Absolutely,
that's the film right there.
absolutely. It is. Yeah, and so it's a real. If you say sadness, I think that sounds a bit too sentimental. But I think to use the word sorrow, not to get too sort of heavy-handed about it, but it just really got me. And the other thing as well, just I'm sort of feel like I'm rattling off just the
No, no,
moment.
no, you're fine. You're fine.
There's a really wonderful moment early on. Again, early on, before we even see a tripod. In fact, that's a lie. I correct myself now. We've seen the first tripod because it comes after the. I think it comes after. Thing. It's at the beginning when he's with his kiddies in his house there under the bridge.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. That's before
That's
the
before, isn't it?
tripod.
That's all before. Forgive me,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
forgotten the story order. But there's the most brilliant moment, isn't there? A little scene where Rachel gets a splinter in her finger, and that's
yeah.
the whole film is summed up in that.
You're true. You're right.
I
You're
mean,
right.
I'm not going to say anything more than that. But the whole film is summed up in that moment. So what seems like a completely innocuous I'm not going to say meaningless. Clearly, it's not. But it's like everything. You hope everything in a movie is there for a very particular reason, some way, somehow. But that scene, I never forgot that scene. Actually, in the 20 years since I saw it, it's like there's the whole film in that one exchange with her telling her dad that she's got a splinter in her finger. I'm not going to elaborate because I don't think I need to. But it's really. I love that when there's something very mundane actually when you either in the moment of seeing it or at some point thereafter, and Spielberg is very good, I think, at bringing that to bear. it then takes on this whole other power, and you're just like, oh wow, I thought she just had a splinter in her finger. It's like it's got this whole other thing to it, and so I just how to describe it. It's funny. I always think it's a film that's slightly overlooked in his filmography, actually.
I agree. And I was talking to one of my buddies the other day, and he was talking about that how the entire film was ruined for him because of the way it ended. And which is one of the things that I want to talk about. We talked about all these great things, and for me, I still remember the moment that we were watching when I was watching at Chinese Man's Theater in LA, is that that scene came up when Robbie's already there at the end with his mom, and considering the last time we saw him was going into this gigantic explosion,
Yeah.
I wish they could have done two things. Maybe they did. I don't know. Maybe had some sort of a scene in between which shows that he was able to escape and how, or we lost him, which is not Spielberg way of ending film, right?
Oh, yeah.
That
And
was that was the part that disappointed me the most, and that's the part sometimes when thinking about the film as a whole is fantastic, and then I realize that ending, I'm like, I wish they had done a little bit more. But what did you think about that?
well, it's interesting because I I had a very clear memory of that being a note of I say maybe frustration is a way to put it. Maybe that was I remember that being a thing at the time. People going, well, how did Robbie get from here to here safe and sound, and what how should it end? Um, so I suppose in a sense, my viewing of it yesterday, in a sense, maybe was sort of filtered through that recollection of it. I mean,
Hmm.
the thing that I don't. Maybe I'm just too easygoing about things, but I mean, it didn't matter to me too much that there wasn't a connective scene or sort of explanation or whatever. But what I was reminded of is how, in a sense, how quickly the film finishes. When you're watching a movie, as with a piece of music, certainly music's a good comparison.
Yeah.
You can kind of tell when it's winding down. There's something about more often than not, there's whatever the genre of music is, you get the feeling of okay, we're winding down now. And I mean that really if it's something you've never heard before. And certainly the same is true of movies. And when I watched yes, I thought, I wonder if I kind of thought, gosh, it ends quite abruptly. There isn't a kind of, they realize the birds are saving the
Yeah.
day, all that, and then we cut to the street and he's walking up the street, and then we're out of there. The film is done. I mean, in one sense, I suppose it's quite admirable because it's like, well, that's the story. There it is. It's very lean, and you know, doesn't hang around at any point in the proceedings. I had forgotten. I don't think I've misremembered this, but is the very last shot that we see of Tom Cruise him hugging Robbie? I think it is. I think that's the last shot, isn't it? That's the last shot of him as a character in the story?
Of him, yeah, not the film, but of him.
No, not of no of the film that we then cut to the tree and we go
The
down the
trees,
street.
yes, yes, yes.
Nice distinction. I like that. But I had in my mind again. This happens a lot. I think, doesn't it? In my mind, I had created an additional shot, which was that we saw Ray reunited with Robbie, and I had then concocted over time an additional shot, which then shows Robbie walking away down the street by himself. But that is just my imagination at work because what I ended up doing, and I mean, and this is sincerely meant, I had started thinking about The Searchers, the John Ford film, and um, Ethan Edwards. Ethan Hunt. Oh my gosh, Ethan Hunt is in the Mission Impossible film. Ethan Edwards. Oh boy, portrayed by John Wayne, has saved the day. I don't want to spoil the film too much because people may want to watch it, and I would certainly recommend that they do if I may. But I had actually conflated the ending of The Searchers with the ending of War of the Worlds in the sense that it would both have a family in a sense coming back together in some shape or form. But then I'd got this thing in my mind, which I'd stolen from The Searchers, which is that that Rachel and Robbie and their mum are back together again, starting their new life, if you like, after the crisis of the invasion. And Ray has no place in that, and so he walks off. But you don't ever see that. All you see is him embracing his son.
Yep.
It made me laugh yesterday about my own ridiculousness, really, thinking, God, I had created an additional shot where we see Ray walking off down the street by himself, as a nod to the ending of The Searchers.
It's interesting you mentioned that because to me, one of the things that I loved about the ending, aside from the part that I didn't like,
Yes.
is that had it been some other director, they would have had I forget Ray's wife um, character. They would have had in the film maybe how they're surviving
Yeah.
his
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
her and her new husband, and some other director would have been probably like that the guy died and then they reunite at the end, or the writer would have done that, but they didn't do that, right? Which was fantastic. And another scene that I thought, it's interesting how over time your perception changes or adds up to it. The scene where Robbie wants to go and fight, and
Mm,
he's on the ground, and Tom, Ray is saying, "You don't have to. You
mm,
don't have to." So at the time, my interpretation, which is still valid today, but I have another add-on to it, was that how when you're invaded, how young people react to that, right? As crazy as it is, but for you, it's like it's about like survive, protecting your people or your land or whatever that is. And that to me was the interpretation and only interpretation at the time, which is still valid today. An add-on to that now is I have a son now, and it's about letting go,
mm, mm.
right? It's about letting go. It's like you're not hovering all the time, and you have to let them be independent and what, which you and I went through too, I'm sure, as children, right? So I wanted to bring that up because to me, I forgot about when we were talking about the most powerful scene. I think that scene is extremely universal and very, very relevant even today.
Yes. Yes. Very much. And also, Joe, watching the film, and we are talking about different aspects of the film. I mean, going back to the very beginning of the film, and certainly again, actually, back to that fantastic scene with the peanut butter scene, if I can call it, at their mum's house, or her new.
Yeah, yeah.
I have to say, what that entire scene also reminded me of, and this will not, well, it reminded me of Hook, which is a completely different kind of movie.
Yes.
Other than broadly speaking, it's a fantasy film, and if we think about science fiction and fantasy, they're distinct, but they're all under some kind of shared umbrella. But the, and again, I'm not for a moment saying that Spielberg and David Koepp are sitting there going, "Oh, well, you did this in Hook. Let's do it." No way. But
No, no,
uh,
no.
but it is there, which is to say that in Hook, it's rendered in a very overtly amusing way, which is, well, Mummy could save us, and the dad is floundering and can't get anything right, of course, which is all part of the initial story material in Hook. But you get the same preoccupation, you get the same issue presented in a very different way because it's a very different movie. And I just thought, wow, okay, because people do, of course, often talk about that child-parent relationship in his movies all the way back. And we started by talking about Jaws a little while ago this morning, and but it's still there. And so there are lots of different ways to, well, be interested by the film, but that domestic scenario is just so familiar to people that it becomes such a wonderful doorway into, or a kind of foothold actually, amidst all of the crazy stuff going on, to put it lightly. But I was really struck by that, and again, I'm just sort of building on what you were saying about that family dynamic between the parent and their children, or parent and their child. And then as I said, watching the peanut butter scene, I just thought, gosh, it's so it's so like Hook, that little bit.
You're
Again,
right.
I can't stress enough that if you've never seen either of these films, which perhaps might be unlikely, they're so different. Actually, I also, if I may say, Joe, just talking about Hook momentarily as a footnote, just how much I enjoyed the conversation you had with Jim V. Hart.
I was gonna mention that. I was gonna ask you if you because it's one of my favorite conversations.
That was wonderful. Well, when I saw it was available, I listened to it, and I was very glad to listen to it, because that film for me is a real, very special one, actually, for any number of reasons. But yeah, it was.
But
I
it I'm glad you talked about Hook because I Hook was one of those films that I, or still maybe still was until I spoke to Jim. One
Mm.
of those films that I don't really think about when I think about Spielberg, like Hook, always, Color Purple, are three and 1941. There are the films that I normally don't think about Spielberg when I think about Spielberg. I mean, I'm not saying they're great films. They're not bad, they're bad films, but Hook I appreciated a lot more because I had to see it to talk to Jim again. And I saw it after a long time. Like, when I was a kid, I saw it in the late 90s. And seeing it as a father was different. And then I appreciated a lot of the technicalities and the storytelling. But obviously, when Jim's told me all the stories and the production designing and all that, like, like how amazing of a film it is.
Oh, it's wonderful.
Um, right? And yeah, I don't know why it's not been on my list.
Well, it's
You
very
know,
interesting. It's really interesting, Gerald, and this is true of we could equally be talking about Christopher Nolan or John Carpenter's movies or Sofia Coppola's movies or whoever. And we all, and this is part of the joy of talking about it and working out why something is special to us, which I think is what it is about deep down. I do think there's a lot to be said for that. Um, you were saying that for you, Hook is not kind of synonymous with Steven Spielberg, film director. Whereas for me, and I absolutely mean this heart and soul, Hook for me is completely synonymous with him. I would.
mm,
It's interesting, isn't it? If I mean, I'm being very trite here. If someone said to me, "Would you rather sit down and watch Jurassic Park this afternoon or Hook?" I'd go for Hook every single time. So it's really interesting. Not that we want to necessarily focus on Hook too much today. It's just sort of come up as a footnote. But isn't it interesting which films, as I say, whether it's Steven Spielberg or any of the other filmmakers that are, in the frame for people, and it could be contemporary filmmakers that we could be talking about Hitchcock and Howard Hawks and John Ford, whoever it may be. But isn't it interesting which films from their filmographies become the kind of the yardstick? They become the the go-to material, if you like. It's really interesting.
I think the reason for that, now that I was talking to about this to somebody on the podcast, I don't remember who. Um, it's not, I believe it's not about the film that you like, is because the film is great, which could be partially the reason. It is mainly about where you are in life and what you're going through and what you're thinking that connects. I'll give you a simple story. I had directors. I don't know if you've seen that episode, directors of Prince of Egypt.
Oh yes, Simon Wells. Yes,
Yeah. So did you remember that story about this woman who went to see the Prince of Egypt with her kids?
yes, yes.
Okay. So I'll just mention it again for the audience that how she went to her husband was abusive, physically abusing her, and the wife and the kids went to see Prince of Egypt, and they walked out and they said we're not going back. And they went on and had their own life, and this girl, the daughter of that mother, met the directors after 15, 20 years. That movie changed the trajectory of their life. And I think Jurassic Park changed the trajectory of my life. Like Hook changed the trajectory and I think that's what matters. You could like one of the most terrible films out there that's ever made, but if it just somehow there's a moment in there that resonates with you, it's the greatest film of all time.
It is, and it's really. I mean, again, not just you and I hope there are other people out there hearing this and going, "Yep, I agree with that." But and it doesn't have to be a contemporary film. It doesn't even have to be a film of your generation, if you like. It could be something that was made in 1935, and you watch it. I mean, and you go, "Oh my gosh!" But this is one of the great. I don't know. It's like it's just such a beautiful part of it, as you say. Whatever the film is, whether it's considered trash or an all-time classic or everything in between, the film has been made to entertain you. That we might assume that's the basic idea, whatever that might quite mean. But you, as the viewer or as the audience, sitting out there in the cinema together, hopefully still together, um, you do you do make it your own. You do bring. In fact, actually, because of the filmmaker we're talking about specifically, I remember when Saving Private Ryan was released in the summer of 1998.
Mm-hmm.
And Steven Spielberg did an interview for or with the Guardian newspaper here in the UK, which has always had a really good film. section basically on its pages, you know. Um, and he said to the interviewer, I'm trying to remember who the interviewer was. I think it was a guy called Simon Hattenstone. You might be able to find the interview online, of course. And Steven Spielberg said, and I'm paraphrasing, but he said, if you've got 100 people in the cinema audience all watching the same film, what's actually happening is that 100 different films are being watched.
Yeah.
And I was so pleased when I mean, maybe I should, have more on my mind, but I can remember that still to this day, reading that. And I remember thinking, while I read it all those years ago, thinking, yes, good man, that's exactly it. And I think what that also ties into, and again, I don't know if I'm sort of jumping outside of our
No, no,
confines.
no, you're fine. Go for it.
Um, I think it's great that he never ever did a commentary for his films.
I completely agree with you.
For the very reason that I've just referred to in terms of the interview, which is that there's 100 different films being watched if there are 100 people watching it, and I I enjoyed any number of DVD documentaries, which feels like ancient history now as a moment in time, and weren't we lucky to have that as a moment in time to grow up in? But I always thought it was really fabulous that he never ever did it because I think, if I may say this, this might be contentious. I don't know. I think the potential downside of a director's commentary is that it sometimes might box in the viewer and think, well, the director said it's about this, therefore that's what it's about. But actually, what we've been talking about, you and I, in the last 2 or 3 minutes, is that you make the film special, in a sense,
Yeah.
kind of regardless, in a sense, of whatever it was that the director or the filmmaker perhaps intended. And I was reading something the other day, and again, I'm paraphrasing, you have to forgive me, but and I know we're here talking about Steven Spielberg's movie, so there's that sense of authorship. But actually, obviously, there are lots of other people working on the film with him, and they're all bringing their
Yeah.
own intelligence to the film. People may know the name Rick Carter, who has
Yep.
collaborated as a production
Production designer. Yep.
many years with Steven Spielberg. And certainly back around the time of movies like Warhorse and Lincoln, which are two of my favorite Steven Spielberg films, they did a series of, and again, you will know these things, Jawad, they did a series of really wonderful kind of panel discussions with the creative heads on each of those movies. So you had, your production
Mm-hmm.
designer, costume designer, sound, and so on, and talking about the making of the film. And again, I'm pretty sure they'll still be available online. And I always loved hearing what Rick Carter had to say, because I have to say he and he did the same when he talked about the production design for The Force Awakens. If people out there are Star Wars fans, Rick Carter, who worked on that movie in terms of production design, his reflections, I think that's the best word to use, his reflections and recollections of what the job of a production designer is generally, and then specifically unto, whether it's Star Wars, The Force Awakens, or Warhorse, or Back to the Future, or an episode of Amazing Stories, or whatever it might be. His comments and insights are so wonderful because he makes a really wonderfully clear case for it's about you, the viewer. What do you make of all this stuff that you're looking at on the screen? And it's a combination of your own real life mixed in with all the other films you've seen and all the I mean, it's this wonderful soup of responses, which is very much what you've been talking about in this conversation. And War of the Worlds has it too. When I was watching it yesterday, it sort of made me smile, actually, because I hadn't picked up on this, which is that the first time we meet, or when we first meet Ray, he's up in the crane on the docks. And almost the last time we see him in the film, he's up inside the tripod saving the day. And I just thought, the film begins and ends with him up inside a machine.
I never thought of that.
That's, well, this is the thing in it, because I don't think I ever thought of that when I first watched it. But watching it with fresh eyes yesterday, I thought, wow, look at that. The first time we see him, he's up in a big machine. And almost the last time we see him, so I'm stretching the rules here a bit, he's also up inside a machine. Now, that's a real footnote kind of observation. But the point I was going to make, actually, was because I just didn't remember. It's as simple as that. I had completely forgotten or never ever picked up on it in the first place. But you've got all those incredible pictograms on the machine when Tom Cruise's character is up inside the cage and the harvesting is well underway, and then he goes up inside the organism of the tripod. In all of that scuffle and melee of activity, the screaming and shouting and the soldier trying to pull him down, all that stuff, you get a couple of shots which are kind of mid shots on people's reactions. But what you see as part of the production design, this is my long-winded point, is there are these really wonderfully placed, I'm going to call them pictograms, that are part of the machinery of the tripod. I mean, if you translated them, it might just say something like "Do not open this door" or something, or something like that. But it was just the detail of it, which is, they're a fleeting moment in a couple of shots. But it's all just about this thing of this, just how vivid and meaningful the production design is. And I think that was what really struck me yesterday, actually watching it, was how beautiful, even though they're monstrous forms, but just how beautiful.
It's the details. Everything is in the details, right? It's like when you get your house, a room redone or something, and somebody will paint it, and if they don't do the corner, that will bother the hell out of you, right? Because it's all in the details at the end of the day.
And I
And
was
sorry.
no, go on, carry on, Joe, please.
No, I was just gonna say Rick Carter. I mean, he did Jurassic Park as well, and so many other films, and he's an amazing production designer. I mean, same thing with Alex McDowell, who did Minority Report, and I always overlooked production designers when I was watching films. I think I probably started appreciating them more in the last 4 or 5 years. Not that I didn't do it before, but I think maybe with the podcast, I've spoken to a lot of production designer, and it just makes me appreciate their work. And obviously, there's so many other people like the costume designers and their teams, and it's a collaborative effort at the end of the day. And War of the Worlds is a direct result of that.
Well, it is, and it's just very, and I think Doug Chiang worked on it as well, didn't he, in terms of kind of various visualizations and concept work. But it's, yeah, I think the word is beautiful, actually. As I said, I know the tripods are bad news for humanity, but they're very beautifully designed, and they're very
Yeah.
beautifully lit, and they're very beautifully presented in the shot. Um, and it, I don't know, it just, there was a lovely series of books published about, oh gee whiz, I'm going to say 25 years ago. Everything seems to be 25 years ago now to me, but anyway. And they were a series of books, and they were published in a series of books called Screencraft. I don't
Mm,
I don't remember the publisher, but that was the series of books. And they certainly had one that was cinematography, which was essentially interviews with a dozen working cinematographers about their process.
mm-hmm.
Janusz Kaminski was one of those DPs. And there was certainly a production design volume in the series. I'm tempted to say there might have been an editing edition as well. Anyway, certainly I'd recommend, if I may, that if people are interested in things, those books are well worth checking out, the Screencraft books. But as you say, the production design, I suppose production design as equally, it's as important as the dialogue and the blocking of a scene, because obviously the blocking of the scene has to work
Of
in
course.
what you've designed, it has to
Yeah.
all, but again, we're sort of not meant to notice it, but actually part of the pleasure of and the delight of being interested in this stuff is that you do kind of look at that. And in fact, I was looking yesterday when, in fact, I was paying some attention to the decor and the production design. I'm not talking now about tripods stomping all over the earth. I'm talking about Ray's house and just what's
Mm.
and just how totally believable it looked to me. It looked completely plausible as a space, as a place.
Yeah.
And how
It just looked like our home. Like, it just looked like a blue collar worker's home, nothing
exactly,
over the top.
exactly, and it just
Yeah.
really. I was just really struck by that. And then again, I suppose we have talked about it by implication, but again, just the camera moves. I mean, that's a sweeping statement. But there's a wonderful moment again early in the film. I love that first 25 minutes actually, where you know, and I think it's around maybe it's the Splinter scene I was talking about earlier. But the camera's on Rachel, and then it moves, and it kind of comes right circles or semicircles round to Tom Cruise's reaction. So rather than there just being a
Cut.
cut, you just get this lovely moment of revelation of his, and it's that those details of storytelling are so if you're interested in them. Some people, I guess, won't be. But if that's something that you appreciate and enjoy watching and kind of paying attention to, this film, works a treat. And again, you get a rather nice. Well, it's not quite a variation on that, but in the cellar scene with Tim Robbins, there's this wonderful moment where um, there's a lovely shot of Rachel and Ray asleep on the sofa.
Mm.
I don't think Tim Robbins' character is even in that part of the cellar at that point. So it's just a shot on them, and he's sung her to sleep with singing the Beach Boys song and so on. And then the camera, I think it does cut, and it comes down to a close up on Rachel, and then she turns, and of course the camera moves, and there's one of the tripod's
The eyepiece.
eyepiece tendril thing, yeah, and again, I thought, again, I'm just dropping all these little observations in. I hope it's interesting, but you think back to the Velociraptor attack in the kitchen at the end of Jurassic Park, and there's that moment where the spoon falls off the
Yeah, yeah.
cabinet, which is very much a moment about the tension and is it going to make a big noise and alert the Velociraptors to the kiddies. There's a similar scene, but not quite, because it's not really done for tension. But it is done to make the animation of the aliens really plausible, which is as the aliens go up the cellar stairs to go back out to the tripod, one of them bumps into the bicycle wheel on the wall. And it's just, it you don't even need it in the moment, but again, it just adds to the believability of it.
And that only happens with production design being
Yeah,
involved, right? And I mean, I'll sort of wrap it up with this one thing that for me, um, you can go to film school, you can do all those things. It's fantastic. You have to be on the field. That's where you learn the most, number one. Which I or anybody else or you will always keep learning no matter how many times you've made films. But one of the things that I have appreciated a lot, which I was talking about earlier, the blocking thing. Um, I'm working on this project which we're hoping to shoot this fall. And for me, if you were to talk to me about 10, 15 years ago, because I've edited a lot too. So for me, the best at the time, editing was, cut, 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 as many cuts as possible to keep people in tune. Which is what the society has become right now because everything is very fast paced. And I have gone the other direction where I have started realizing in the last 10 to 15 years that how important it is not to cut. And that really immerses your audience into the characters, into the film. I mean, a great example of that is the film The Post with Meryl Streep and Tom Hanks, right? The opening sequence, I was watching Spielberg's interview, they actually did a lot of coverage over the shoulder, but in the end, they only used one shot. And that sets up the film so amazingly because it's really about them too. And it's not just because it's a gimmick, it's just because it required it. It worked.
yeah,
And that's what matters. It's you have to, and I'm just kind of what I'm trying to say in a nutshell is that you have to, and I keep reminding myself this every single day, is that you have to make sure that your audience doesn't lose attention, right? And a great example of that, and just being the last point, and we'll wrap it up with your final thoughts. I think it was one of the editors who worked on Godfather Part 3 and Megalopolis, Glenn. I had him a couple of times. I forget his last name. He was telling me the story that which he had heard from Francis Ford Coppola, or maybe Jim was telling me the story, who worked on Dracula, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
oh yeah, okay, yeah, yeah,
Right. So the story was that when Godfather 2 had this early screenings, people hated it. And Francis Ford Coppola went underneath his bedroom's bed and just start, nerve-wracking, like, what the hell am I doing? And he talked to his editor, and finally they realized that the problem wasn't the film. The problem was the editing. So, you know how the film goes from past to present?
yeah,
In the very first set of screenings, the film was going back and forth every 10 minutes.
okay,
And they realized that the audience was getting knocked out of it. So they held on to each scene, time period for 20 minutes. And that was it. that made the difference. So it's about keeping your audience. You have to give your audience time to get to know your character, the characters that you have, the space, the story. If you pull them out of it too quickly, then it might be
Yeah,
the
yeah.
greatest film, but you've lost your audience.
Yeah, yeah. No, that it's again we could again maybe we'll do this another day, but I mean you can having made that point there, Jared, you can then use it, and I mean this in a very good productive way. You could say, okay, right, so let's look at again if we were inclined, let's look at some nice examples of where we really stay with the character. I mean, again, actually come right back to War of the Worlds, right up at the beginning of the film when they realize something's not quite right. They haven't yet gone down to the junction with the church and all the rest of it. But there's a shot where Ray, I guess he realizes Robbie's gone out, maybe nicked the
Yeah,
car. And
yeah.
there's a wide shot. You see Ray come out of his house. He comes down the steps onto the street. The car's not. That's right. The car's not there. And then Ray kind of goes out into the street, and there are lots of other people beginning to mill around and look. And but you stay with him. There's not. You don't get. You don't sort of get a shot of him coming out of the door, walking towards the camera, then over the shoulder of him walking down to the street. I mean, you would still know where you were, but you're keeping the mood through that one shot. Um, I I wrote a or co-wrote a script for a short film a long time ago now, which was made. I have to say, made very beautifully. Actually, that might sound a little bit self-serving, but it was really beautifully directed and made. And I had nothing to do with that beyond the words on the page. And the very first shot of that short film, the camera starts on a close-up. It doesn't just cut to the next. The camera then tracks right back. So within the circumstances of a short film, it's using up a little bit of screen time, but it puts you in the world of the story and it gives you a sense of the atmosphere and the mood. So it's the duration of a shot. Actually, let those shots linger and stage them in an interesting way, and then you're using your more sort of almost staccato rhythms, if you like, to maybe build the tension or release the tension and go from there. So, you know, again, beginning of the movie, that very first shot, you get the introduction with Morgan Freeman and you get that wonderful. I wanted to say this just because it was a great example of just good old, clear, interesting storytelling. You get the Earth out in space, and then we go to the red of Mars, and then you get a transition where the red of Mars becomes the red of the traffic light,
Hmm.
which again sums up a lot of what the story is. Stop, the world is going to stop, danger. So all of those little grace notes of style, which is what it is, and compressing things. It's just, I don't know. That's why, apart from anything else that his films give us, it's all of that moment to moment enjoyment, really, if you're inclined to look out for it.
It is, and I mean, just to kind of wrap it up, one last thing, what you said about him coming down the stairs and there's all the people around wondering what happened. That's pretty much what I think storytelling is, that you shouldn't let your audience get out. I mentioned this earlier. Like, he could have easily cut to different people back and forth,
Yeah,
but then that takes the audience not knowing who the hell Ray is, because every second Ray is on that frame, the way he turns, the way he walks, the way he takes a step, speaks volumes in a subconscious way to the audience's mind, and that's why he's the greatest filmmaker of all time, and probably will always will be.
he's I don't it just I know there's been lots written about it, and he's obviously done any number of interviews over the decades now, and so have his collaborators. But even with all of that information and data sort of in the back of my head, when I sit down and watch one of his movies, whether it's brand new and my gosh, I'm looking forward to next year, or whether I'm watching War of the Worlds for the first time in some years, I'm just completely. I end up getting to the end of the film, and the very first thing I always think to myself is, how does he do that?
Yeah, and that's a question that we will get another answer to next year when he's coming out with another film with UFOs or aliens or something. Nobody knows what it's about. So, which is, I think, written by David Koepp as well.
Yeah, it is. Yeah,
If I'm not,
I'm
yeah.
so looking forward
So
to it. I can't tell you,
there's
but
no title, only I think Emily, what's her name? Emily Blunt.
yeah.
Emily Blunt is in it and a few other actors. But looking forward to that. So maybe we'll talk about that next year.
Well, I would love
Uh,
to. I have to, when that film was announced in May of last year,
yeah.
I basically bought my ticket to the film there and then. I was like, that. It went straight to the top of my film list of what to look forward to most. So, no surprise that I would say that at all.
Amazing, man. Well, it's been awesome talking to you once again.
You're
Lovely
welcome.
conversation. I'll be in touch if I'm down there. We'll hook up.
Yes, that'd be great. Thank you so much, Jawad.
Thanks, James. Take care.
Take care. Bye for now, everybody. Thank you.